Hello, welcome back. This is More to the Story. I'm your host, Janna Maron. In addition to this podcast, I also publish Under the Gumtree, a literary arts magazine publishing creative nonfiction and visual art. You can learn more about the magazine, how to subscribe, how to submit your work to be considered for publication over at underthegumtree.com. And your subscription and your submission directly supports the work of the artists and writers that we publish because you are helping us to continue stay in publication, giving an outlet for these writers to have their work published and find readers and an audience. And many of them, over the 14 years of publishing, we're now in our 15th year. By the time you hear this episode, it's probably about mid-March, and we've published one issue this year. We have another issue on the way. And so we're halfway. By the time the next issue publishes, we'll be halfway to our 15-year anniversary, which is crazy. I cannot even imagine that being the case. But here we are. So what I was saying is that over the 14 plus years of publishing, we have had many, many writers who were published for the first time in Under the Gumtree. And then in the years since being published with us, many of them have gone on to have books published, have work published in bigger, more prestigious publications than ours. But for many people, they consider Under the Gumtree to be one, like the beginning and the place where their writing and publishing journey started. And that to me is a great honor. I consider that to be a great honor. And I feel very, very privileged that the writers who we publish trust us with their work. So head on over to underthegumtree.com to find out about subscribing and submitting your work to be considered. I'm also a book coach and an editor for women writing true personal stories in any form of nonfiction that takes. And I started saying any form of nonfiction so that I could help listeners and people who read my writing understand that I don't work exclusively with memoir writers. I also work with women who write what's traditionally called or considered in the publishing world prescriptive nonfiction. So self-help, how-to, even business books, because those books often include the personal story of the author in some way, and that's where they get tripped up. They aren't sure how or when or if it's even appropriate, and I have to come along and say, absolutely it's appropriate, because guess what? That's the thing that your reader is going to connect with. That's the thing that gives you the authority to build trust with your reader. As soon as you start disclosing some of your own personal experience, your own personal journey about how and why you do the things the way you do and came up with this like philosophy or whatever it is that you're sharing in your book, they're going to be more likely to listen, kind of nod their heads and follow along. You're going to create buy-in for the reader simply by sharing your personal story. So if you have always wanted to write a book, you're dreaming about writing a book, you're thinking about writing a book, maybe you've even started, but you're stuck somewhere and you can't figure out how to get moving forward, that's where I can help. Head on over to moretothestory.co/book diagnosis, where you can schedule a free 15-minute call with me. And I call it a diagnosis call because that's exactly what I'm doing. You're going to tell me about your book project. You're going to tell me what challenges or problems you're facing. I'm going to diagnose the problem. And then I'm going to recommend next steps, which may or may not include working with me. And so there's absolutely no pressure. If you're writing a prescriptive nonfiction book and you think an outline would be the thing that would help you, I also have a free book outline formula worksheet, which you can download over at moretothestory.co/book outline. And before I forget, this episode is brought to you by Cafe Santoro. It is a boutique coffee roastery based here in Northern California, owned and operated and roasted by my parents. So if you are interested in checking out some locally owned and operated roasted coffee from Northern California, connected to someone that you maybe follow and listen to and feel like you might know a little bit if you've been listening to me for any amount of time, head on over to cafesantoro.com/Janna, where you can get 10% off your first order. And even if you don't drink decaf, you can order some decaf, try it, and be wowed and question whether it really is decaf, which is what often happens when people try my parents' decaf. It's the best decaf I've ever had, and if you don't believe me, head on over to Janna. More to the no. You can't get coffee at moretothestory.co, but you can book a diagnosis call with me. You can get coffee at cafesantoro.com/Janna for your for 10% off your first order. Oh, just another example of how we keep things here easy breezy, raw and casual. There's no formality around here. We just stumble all over our words and keep going, and know that you appreciate the realness and the authenticity that it hopefully projects in the show here. cafesantoro.com/Janna for 10% off your order of whole bean roasted coffee from my parents' boutique coffee roastery based here in Northern California. All right, I have another client interview for you today, and I'm very excited to introduce to you my client, Margaret Whitford, who served in leadership positions within the nonprofit world for 20 years, including 10 years in the social justice field before turning to writing. She is fascinated by the ways in which each of us seek to create places of refuge in both a metaphorical and physical sense. The History We Carry is her first memoir. A dedicated Francophile, she and her husband divide their time between a small village in the south of France and their home in Concord, Massachusetts. You can learn more about Margaret and her book at margaretwhitford.com. And I'm very excited for this interview because Margaret's book is about to be released in a few months. It's coming out in June 2026, and here we are, ideally mid-March by the time this episode releases, and so that book is available for pre-order. All the information on how to do that and where to find it will be in the show notes of this episode at moretothestory.substack.com. But without further ado, here is my conversation with Margaret.
Hi, Margaret. It's so great to talk with you today. Thank you for being here.
Well, hi, Janna. It's a pleasure. It always is a pleasure to talk to you.
And I'm excited to hear about your book project. I mean, I know about it, but I'm excited to have this be a recorded conversation and be able to share with an audience of what your book is about. So let's start off with a brief intro to you and the book itself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I came to writing pretty late in life. I mean, I had always enjoyed writing and found it very challenging. And I found in my professional life, I've been kind of rewarded for writing. So I often gravitated toward tasks within the organization that required strong writing skills. That said, I had never studied writing, had never studied writing in any formal way. So after actually 20 years in the not-for-profit field, much of that in leadership positions, and the last 10 years in the social justice field, I went back to graduate school for an MFA in creative writing. And at the time, at Chatham University in Pittsburgh, and at the time, I really wanted a community of writers rather than a low residency program, even though there's some really fine ones out there. And at the time, my goal was really just to, for the first time in my life, I was going to pursue something just for the love of it. Mm-hmm. And my goals were very modest. It was really just, if I emerge from the program a better writer and a better reader, then that's great. And then, of course, over time, my goals became more ambitious, including publishing my work, because I think while I don't think that's the goal of many writers. Certainly when they start out with a memoir, their idea is not, oh, I want to publish this. I think they are compelled to tell a story that feels essential to them. There's something haunting them, or some question they can't let go of. But I also think to publish your work means to take it to another level, because you will end up with readers, however few or many there are, who don't know you as a writer. They don't care about your life personally necessarily. They don't care how hard you worked on this. They just want to respond to what's on the page.
Right.
So with that goal in mind of publishing, I'm happy to say that in no small part, thanks to your help as a developmental editor, my memoir is going to be published by She Writes Press in June of 2026.
Yes, very exciting.
It is exciting. It's a little nerve-wracking, but it's also exciting.
Well, talk a little bit about how that the impetus for a book length project came for you, because I know when you talk about the goal shifting from not necessarily wanting to pursue publishing to pursuing publishing, for you at first, it wasn't necessarily book length work. It was short form, and you were getting published in the journals and magazines like a lot of writers do. So, how did it come about that you decided, oh, there's a book here and I want to do a book?
Well, I think one, I think I picked a really complex subject, which is revealed by the title of the memoir, and that's the history we carry, a daughter's memoir, um, because it involves an exploration of my mother's history, much of which was traumatic, and how that history affected her and then our relationship. And that's can't really be reduced to an essay, as much as I would like to try.
Right.
I will say that when I first started to think of it as a book was in 2016, when I brought a very, very dense essay to the Vermont College of Fine Arts Postgraduate Writers Conference. I had been attending for a couple of years. This was my first chance to work with Sue Williams-Silverman, who I know you know, and is a fine memoirist and essayist and even a poet. And she told me basically, not only are there many essays within this one very dense essay, but there's likely a book. And so I started thinking about it as a book length project at that point.
How did that feel when you heard that?
Having not started the work of writing a book, I thought that what a great idea. I have my marching orders. I know where I'm going. I'm going to write a book. Not really, and something a writer friend of mine said to me a long, long time ago keeps coming back to me because it proved to be so true. And that's that the only way to learn how to write a book is to write a book.
Yes.
Like you can't learn to swim by reading about it. You have to get in the pool.
Right. Exactly. I mean, we can say that over and over as much as we want, but it's almost like you also can't learn that or fully embody that lesson without attempting it yourself first. I can't tell you how many writers I talk to at the beginning stages of book projects who still want a formula, still want a roadmap, still want all the easy answers. And I can certainly guide people as much as I can. And my guidance really is all about, you still have to figure it out for yourself.
Exactly. I've heard you say that in indirect ways, some of it, excuse me, depends on your audience. But I think the other thing about writing is that the book will tell you what it wants to be.
Yes.
Even though you think you're imposing knowledge you're imposing a structure. In fact, it's far more productive to let the structure evolve. Yes. And to let the questions take you where they need to go. I mean, a mentor once said to me, if you really feel you need a nap, you absolutely need a nap. Perhaps you should, whatever your body or your mind's doing to try and say, oh, let's not do that. Let's not go there. That's probably exactly where you have to go. So.
Exactly. So what was it like then for you to go from, oh, I'm writing a book to, oh, I'm writing a book? Like you're in it and you're trying to assemble a draft. Talk about that process.
Well, it was a very long process. And some of it is that I'm also a very slow writer. I wish I were one of those writers who would allow themselves to just turn out, a really bad first draft. And that's not to say that my first draft is a good draft, but until I have a first line that I like, I don't go on. I will keep obsessing about that first line. So it means that it is a slow process for me. And I started first really with the interviews that I conducted with my mother during the last decade of her life, and then research that those interviews require, to try and especially understand the historical context for some of the events my mother experienced during the Second World War. And that part was kind of fun because I would say it's book related, but I'm not really trying to, I'm not necessarily trying to do battle with the page.
Right.
And so, but part of what happened in my process, even though as slow as it was, and this is where I happily and luckily encountered you, I kept kind of writing myself into a corner. I could get to I could look at certain aspects of my mother's history. I could get almost to a point in the book, and it felt like I kept writing the same 80 to 100 pages again and again and again, and not seeing sort of where I needed to go from there.
Mm-hmm.
And that just felt counterproductive at some point,
Mm-hmm.
frustrating. I thought, well, I know there is a book here, but I can't see it. And I don't seem able to keep, I don't see the arc of this narrative.
Right.
I'm not really telling a story. I'm kind of documenting the facts of a personal history, but not telling a story.
Right. How long do you feel like you stayed in that space?
Oh, pretty long time, I would say, that because I started sort of being serious, that the idea that this is a book in 2016, having that idea, and then trying to start with that and really getting more serious about it. In fact, having the chance to work with Sue William Silverman as a mentor in a postgraduate program at VCFA. And sort of that helped enormously, because she helped refine my approach. She really taught me some important craft lessons about writing, about the use of sensory detail, about how to create scene. In some ways, it was Sue that gave me permission to animate my mother on the page, to create her as a character, to imagine scenes that I could create based on stories she told me, based on what I could verify through my research, without having to say, well, of course I wasn't there. And of course, I can't prove that it rained the day I'm describing, but it worked. But but the emotional experience I wanted to evoke is better evoked on a rainy day than a sunny day, for example. So I was learning more about craft, but I still wasn't sure where the story was going. And when I first talked to you about the nonfiction boot camp, I will forever be in your debt that you very generously offered to take everything I had and look at it. And I thought, oh, do not ask twice, Margaret. Send it on. Don't wait for her to change your mind. And so I did. And then you saw some things I hadn't seen, including a structure that I hadn't seen.
Well, and I remember that first conversation, Margaret, and I just sensed how exhausted you were.
I was.
You were exhausted. Like you had burnt yourself out on this project. And you needed a break. Cool. You needed a break, really, is what you needed.
I mean, it took me a good, I was going to say my mother died in 2012. And so did the book start there? In some ways it did, because there were aspects about her death that really haunted me. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to figure this out. Why wasn't I with her when she died? Why didn't she ask for me before she died? Why was there this distance between us? And when I realized that on some level it was inevitable that it be that way, I needed to understand what had made it inevitable. But I didn't know that would end up in a book. And so, 4 years later, I'm having written about it in different ways, and but more in essay form, I thought, well, okay, then I'm thinking about a book. But it was, by the time I talked to you, and I want to say it was 2021 maybe, or 20.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So I'd been working on it for 5 years already.
Right.
I didn't have a first draft yet. I had some 5th, 6th, 7th drafts of early material, but I didn't.
You had a partial draft.
At a partial draft.
Yeah. And really, I don't offer to work with people in the same way as you did when you mentioned nonfiction boot camp anymore. But the way I had structured that program was essentially for the purpose of exactly what you said, like, give me everything you have the first deadline for nonfiction boot camp was a maximum of 30,000 words. And I think you had about that. And so that's really what a developmental edit is of a partial manuscript at that stage. It's looking at everything that currently exists and starting to think about, okay, how can we shape this? Where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that first of all, you identified themes that I think often the writer doesn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
You're once they're pointed out to a writer that's like, oh yeah, absolutely, there's certainly about identity.
I meant to do that.
Yeah, maybe I could do it again. But one of the things you said to me that really helped me at the time was that you said it was a collection of linked essays.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that was so important, especially for my particular project, was because it gave me containers to work with.
Right.
One of the challenges in looking at my mother's history was that because so much of it had been marked by trauma and complex trauma, it was almost as though I couldn't deal with all of it in one fell swoop. I had to sort of look at her aspects of her history almost through different lenses.
Right.
And then because I could think about it as essays, it would be sort of, well, this is what you're looking at now. That is the only thing that, and that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that, and this isn't true for every writer, but it proved to be really important for me in this project, was that once and some of the essays are now chapters, whatever we want to call them, went through multiple titles. Some of the titles I stuck with them, and they were like beacons toward which I was writing. In other cases, I struggled to find the title, and when I finally did, then I knew what the essay was about, because the title ended up being almost this little summary of what the essay was going to be about.
Sure. Yes.
Yes. And in some cases, I thought, well, I'll never write about this subject, but I had a title that kept coming back to me. And the end, and one of those titles is an essay called "Other People's Children," and in some ways, I knew I'd have to come back to that. I'd have to write an essay to work with that title, and I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that about what to call it, because the book itself. The title of the book, I should say, The History We Carry, A Daughter's Memoir. It doesn't say a collection of essays or a memoir and essays or anything like that. And I'm eager to read the finished published version, because I'm sure it's different from the draft that you and I worked on together. But I'm kind of assuming there's still that sense of this linked essay structure, because I know you as a writer and know how your writing works. And just because that's how you think of it doesn't necessarily mean that's what it has to be labeled on the book cover. And I think that's an important thing to point out, because writers frequently get so hung up on what to call it when actually it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, but it doesn't. I had another conversation with another nonfiction bootcamp alumni who has gone back and forth from calling hers memoir to fiction to maybe now it's autofiction. And she felt like she had to do that, give it this fiction framework to open up some freedom and liberty in her writing process. And I'm thinking, if that's what you have to do, great. I mean, that doesn't negate the truth or the fact that this actually still happened to her as a writer, as an author.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I would say that I still think I think when you read the final book, you'll find that titles have not changed from what you saw, that other than the title of the whole book, and that the changes, I hope, are ones of refinement, not substantive changes at all. I'm at the point now where and this sounds maybe a bit flippant, but I don't care what we call it as long as
Yeah,
readers read it.
exactly.
For me, it's still a collect, I think of it more as linked essays,
Right.
but I could have an argument with someone, well, would these pieces stand alone? And it's like, well, some would, but
Yeah,
they benefit from an accumulation of information. The
that's right.
order, as it turns out, is very important. And
That's
that's
right.
something that fell into place. I guess the one thing, when we think about memoir or fiction, I would say that if a writer needs to, for whatever reason, feels she doesn't have sufficient creative license, if she sticks to what her understanding of memoir and that she wants to call it fiction, I'm fine with that. I'm not fine with the reverse. I
Same,
think, yeah,
same.
yeah, I think because I suspect we would agree on that point. Because I think you are making a contract with a reader.
Yes,
In the case of memoir, I think you are committing to emotional truth as bravely as you can render it. And
yes,
that doesn't mean you willfully distort facts. I would say you do not do that. If you can verify the fact, verify the fact. But they don't look for, I don't think a reader looks for a factual rendering of events other than, let's agree the Second World War began when we said it, when it did. But
right.
uh, so I think that's important. But
Yes.
because I think memory is mutable. And I do have now a note to readers that basically kind of says that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My version of events is not necessarily other people's versions of
That's
events.
right. That's right. Yeah, that's a really great distinction. And what I'm learning about genre is you can call it whatever you need to call it to get yourself through the process of writing. And then what you call it for publishing needs to, it's like it's serving two different purposes almost. Then once you're ready to publish, it's a whole different public facing, yeah, categorization, labeling for the purposes of selling and for the purposes of bookstores to know where to put it on their shelf. That's two
Exactly.
completely different things that we're talking about.
Exactly. And I really wasn't aware that She Writes Press, and I'm going to say maybe it's at least 30% of the time change titles. But as soon as I went in with the title Homecoming, and it happened to be the last essay in the collection. And
Mm-hmm.
I could argue that it made sense thematically also,
Yes.
but it's kind of a generic title. There are other
Yep.
books out there that are called Homecoming and have nothing to do with the subject that I am addressing. And so She Writes Press came up with a different title, and I have to say I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I learned, or am learning and working with a publisher, I think in this case they offered me several options for the titles. I don't need to like all the options. I just need to really like one.
That's right. That's right. And
Really like
I'm glad you brought that up, and I was going to kind of pivot to the publishing process anyway. So talk a little bit more about that process and what it's been like for you, how you came to work with She Writes Press. They're a hybrid publisher, and what that experience has been like.
well, I I knew that I wanted a third party vetting of this book. So for me, self-publication just wasn't an option I wanted to consider, although I think it is a wonderful option for certain writers if they're really clear about what their goals are in terms of putting the book out. For me, especially given the sensitive nature of what I was dealing with, insecurity around the complaint, the criticism that many writers of memoir open themselves up to, which is it's self-indulgent to look at this kind of history and no one's going to care about it but you. And, it's not, if it's therapy, keep it in your notebook. It's not out for public consumption. So I really wanted a third party endorsement. Now, She Writes Press as a hybrid press is doing that because they're putting their name on it.
Mm-hmm.
That was very important to me. If I had been able to go with an independent press because I also don't have an agent, so there was a limited number of presses that I could approach and not being agented. And I just, I didn't sort of have the stamina to continue doing that indefinitely and not getting any kind of response at all, because sometimes
Yeah.
you really send it out into the void. You don't hear anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
One university press, I waited a year, and I actually sort of had an introduction there and never heard anything. So I'd heard good things about She Writes Press. They've been in business a long time. I have a lot of respect for Brooke Warner. I think she's really trying to champion, the title would suggest, champion female writers. She has a special passion for memoir. And so I felt happy submitting it to them. I think most people will know what a hybrid press is, but in this case, I, as the writer, front the costs of producing the book, but then I get a higher percentage of the royalties.
Right.
So I'm, essentially investing in my own project.
Right.
But I've got the full weight of a publishing house behind me with that expertise, cover
Right.
design, title selection. My book is now slowly moving through the design process, so I should get first pages hopefully very soon.
Ooh, very exciting. And with that acquisition, I think it's an important distinction to make between a press like She Writes Press and other so-called hybrid presses that are much more like actually vanity presses, where all you're doing is paying to have your book published, when She Writes Press has an acquisitions process and they don't just publish everybody who submits to them.
No, they don't. And that was really important to me, that they don't publish everybody that submits. As you said, there is an acquisition process. If they're interested in the book, or they think there's real potential there, but they don't think it's ready for publication, there is a developmental track you can take with them, or they will suggest you do that and then resubmit to them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no guarantee that they would take the book, even if you were to pursue developmental editing with them. And that's a separate track that has nothing to do with the publishing process.
Right.
But they also, they've been around a long time. They're now part of the Stable Book Group. So that is a change that I think actually enhances their resources. And they are distributed by Simon & Schuster. So
right.
that too is an important thing. So I wanted a house invested in my book, however we came about that.
Yes.
But while I've got financial skin in the game, so to speak, they have a reputational risk.
They do. And the distinction with the distribution, I think, is important to point out as well, because that is something that not all hybrid or even independent presses have these days. That's a network of relationships that has to be maintained to get the book into bookstores.
Absolutely. And I know they're very active in that. I mean, they manage that very carefully, and they do things like where, this was really helpful to me, where I had to produce a tip sheet, but they kind of urge you. And the tip sheet is, I guess, the stuff that creates the metadata. Am I using the right vocabulary? And that'll be out there in the ether and everywhere about your book. And they don't insist, but they urge you to hire a consultant that from a group of consultants they recommend to help you with your tip sheet.
Like marketing consultant?
Well, I think they're marketing, but they also just really, they do tip sheets. These are people who know how to do this,
Okay.
They know the vocabulary, they know the kind of where you look for comparable titles and which ones are going to really resonate the more. I think I'm saying this right, the BSAC. So where will your book be listed? All the different way, what are your key selling points? And so I did a draft of that tip sheet and then worked with a consultant to finish it. And at a very modest price, she cleaned it up, and now I refer back to it, that make me a little, probably not for today's purposes, but would typically make me more articulate talking about the book.
Well, we're recording at the beginning of November, and I don't know exactly when this episode will release. So do you have a sense of when the book will be available for pre-order?
I don't yet. I think it may be available for pre-order before the end of the year, but okay. I don't intend to promote that because I just think people will be sick of me then by the time they can actually get the book. So since it's coming out in June, I would expect to start to promote that its availability for pre-order after the new year.
Okay.
if I will make the cover available to you shortly, and I think right now, if people want to learn more about it, the best thing to do is to go to my author website, and that's just my name, margaretwhitford.com. And there's information about the book, and when pre-ordering information is available, it will be up on the site.
Okay, great. Well, I was going to ask what you're working on now, but it sounds like you're pretty consumed with just preparing for the release of The History We Carry.
I'm pretty consumed with that. I'm waiting for those first pages so that
Right.
I can turn those around in a timely manner without making mistakes. I don't want to see a final book out there going, oh, why didn't I see that typo? So I expect to be working on that. I have started doing a blog, not on Substack yet, maybe that eventually. And that's good for me because that's a different kind of writing than I usually do. It's faster, it's shorter, and I have to lower my standards, frankly. So I'm not trying to submit to literary journals. I did start a new project about my husband Tom's and my experience in Africa. In fact, you read 10,000 words there. So I have not abandoned that, but it is sort of sitting. I like to think marinating. Let me think about that one right now, so I can go back to it.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Well, Margaret, thank you so much for being here today and sharing about your journey. It's been really wonderful to see this process firsthand from when we started working together to now with your book about to be released. I'm really excited for you, and just congratulations.
Well, thank you very, very much, Janna. I honestly, it would not have happened without you, and I so appreciate you. I so appreciated your support then, and appreciate it now. So thank you.
Yes, my pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Margaret, so much for being here. What a wonderful conversation, and I loved hearing. Again, I'm very familiar with the story of your writing project, of your writing journey, your publishing journey, the journey of this specific book, obviously, since I worked on it with you. And I'm so thrilled to see it come to fruition now. Here we are several years later after we initially started working together, but hearing it all again and in this format for listeners to listen and hear and learn and hopefully gain some inspiration from your journey. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can find all the links mentioned in this episode, including Margaret's website, margaretwhitford.com, where you can find her book, The History We Carry, which is available now for pre-order. All those links and everything will be in the show notes of this episode over at moretothestory.substack.com. You can, of course, always follow me on Instagram at Janna Marlise. You can follow Under the Gumtree on Instagram at Under Gumtree. Don't forget to check out cafesantoro.com/Janna for 10% off your first order of coffee beans roasted by my parents and their boutique coffee roastery. Don't forget to head on over to moretothestory.co/book diagnosis, where you can schedule a 15-minute call with me to diagnose the problem you're facing in your book project and get recommendations for next steps, as well as moretothestory.co/book outline. If you think the book outline worksheet would be helpful for you, the book outline formula worksheet is free at moretothestory.co/book outline. And last but certainly not least, the theme song is written and performed by Jeremy Maron. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon on the next episode of More to the Story.